Rain pelted against the diner window as I scrubbed the same spot on the counter for the third time, lost in thought. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to drive me crazy. I checked the wall clock, 2:17 a.m. The late shift dragged as usual. If it weren't for the tips, I'd have quit months ago. Refill. I asked a trucker nursing cold coffee at the end of the bar. He waved me off, too exhausted to speak. The bell over the entrance jingled, pulling my attention. A man in a soaked hoodie stumbled in, water dripping from his sleeves. His head stayed down as he settled into a booth. Instinctively, I reached for a menu, but before I could approach, he waved me off, signaling he didn't want anything. I shrugged it off. Weirdos were part of the job. Behind the counter, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Probably spam. I hit ignore, but seconds later, it buzzed again. This time, a text. We need to talk. Urgent. Mom. My chest tightened. It had been over a year since I'd heard from her. The woman who'd chosen her new family over me. The woman who kicked me out when I was 19, calling me a selfish distraction to her second marriage. I deleted the text. I thought I could forget, but the memories clawed their way back that night. After Dad died when I was 12, it was just me and Mom for a while. We weren't close, but she tried in her own way, weekend trips, late-night pizza runs after she worked long hours as a paralegal. For a while, it felt like we might be okay. Then she met Greg. Greg was the complete opposite of Dad, polished, corporate, wealthy. He had two perfect kids, Ivy and Connor, who came prepackaged with expensive hobbies and private school resumes. Within 6 months, Mom went from overworked single parent to trophy wife. At first, I thought I'd still have a place in her new life. Then came the "You're an adult now" speech, followed by, "There's only so much we can do." I was 19, still in community college, working double shifts at the hardware store, and scrambling to stay afloat. They didn't even let me pack all my stuff before changing the locks. The next morning, after another sleepless night, I was running on fumes when my phone buzzed again. I expected another spam message, but it wasn't. "Call me, please." Against my better judgment, I dialed back. Her voice came through strained, almost panicked. "Ashley," she whispered. I need your help." I almost laughed. "Help? After what you did?" "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious," she insisted, her tone cracking. "It's about your trust fund." My grip on the phone tightened. I hadn't thought about that in years. My late grandparents had left me a small trust for college, locked until I turned 21. Mom always hated that she couldn't touch it, especially after Greg's investments started falling apart. "Let me guess," I said coldly. "Greg needs money for another business venture?" "It's more complicated than that." Her voice dropped. "Please, just come home." Before I could respond, the line went dead. Against my better judgment, I drove to the address she'd texted, Greg's sprawling estate on the edge of town. My stomach twisted as I pulled up, memories of being shoved aside replaying like a bad movie. The door creaked open before I could knock. Greg stood there, perfectly put together in his tailored blazer, but his usual smugness was gone. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "Ashley," he said, his voice tight, "we don't have much time." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Mom appeared behind him, thinner than I remembered, her face lined with exhaustion. "Come inside." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity anchored me in place. In the living room, I noticed something strange. Their usual spotless home was cluttered with papers, laptops, and half-empty coffee mugs. Documents were scattered across the marble countertop. "What's this?" I gestured toward the mess. Greg stiffened. "Our business hit some legal troubles. We're facing foreclosure." "Not my problem." "Actually, it is." Mom's voice trembled. "The court, they froze the trust fund." My heart pounded. "What?" They think we're hiding assets," she whispered. "We need you to sign a release, just temporarily, so we can unfreeze the account." Rage burned through me. "You expect me to hand over my future because you screwed up?" Greg took a step closer, voice cold. Be reasonable. If we lose everything, it'll ruin your mother. I stared at them both, realizing the horrifying truth. They didn't care about me. They never had. You forged something, didn't you? I hissed. Mom paled. It's complicated. I turned on my heel, heading for the door. Greg's hand clamped around my wrist. We're not done, he hissed. But before he could say more, the doorbell rang. An unexpected interruption. He froze, loosening his grip just enough for me to pull away. I bolted for the door and yanked it open, only to freeze. A man in a dark hoodie stood on the front steps, face shadowed under the porch light. It's about your father, he said quietly. The man's face was partially hidden under the soaked hoodie, but something about his voice rooted me to the spot. Greg stormed up behind me, his expression darkening. Who the hell are you? He barked. The stranger didn't flinch. I'm someone who can explain what's really going on. If Ashley wants the truth. The tension crackled like live wires. I felt Greg's grip twitch toward my shoulder, but I stepped outside, slamming the door behind me before he could react. Start talking, I demanded, crossing my arms. The man exhaled slowly, water dripping from the edges of his hood. Your father. He didn't die the way they told you. A cold numbness spread through me. What are you talking about? He reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn envelope sealed with red wax. Everything's inside. Proof. He thrust it into my hands before glancing back toward the house. You're in danger. They're desperate. More than you know. Before I could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the darkened street like a ghost. I sat in my car, staring at the envelope, hands trembling. The wax seal was unbroken, stamped with a strange, looping insignia. Something I didn't recognize. Heart pounding, I broke the seal and pulled out a stack of faded papers. The first was a death certificate, my father's. Official, but tampered with. Certain sections had been clumsily redacted with correction fluid, replaced by faint handwritten entries. Cause of death, car accident. Except, it wasn't. The next page was a sealed legal notice, dated 4 days after Dad's supposed death. It confirmed that a sizable life insurance payout had been issued, but not to my mother. It went to Greg. My breath hitched. How was that possible? They didn't even know each other back then, or so I thought. A loud banging on my car window jolted me back to reality. Greg loomed outside, rain streaming down his furious face. Get out of the car, he snarled. My mind raced, scrambling to hide the documents beneath the passenger seat. I unlocked the door, stepping out with forced calm. What are you doing? He snapped. I needed air. I lied, teeth chattering. His glare deepened. We're not finished inside. Before I could protest, he grabbed my arm and marched me back toward the house. My mother hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. What was in the envelope? She demanded. I feigned confusion. What envelope? Greg's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe me. But before he could press further, the sound of shattering glass erupted from inside the house. We all froze. Greg cursed under his breath and stormed inside. I exchanged a brief glance with my mother, who looked paler than ever. For the first time, she seemed genuinely afraid. Not for me, but for herself. We followed Greg into the living room. The large bay window had been shattered, shards glinting on the hardwood floor. The wind howled through the gaping hole, scattering loose papers. Stay here, Greg ordered before disappearing into the kitchen to check the back entrance. My mother grabbed my wrist, nails digging into my skin. You need to leave. Now. Her desperation startled me. What are you talking about? They know what you have. Her voice cracked. You're not safe here. You knew about Dad's death being fake. It wasn't a question. It was a fact I felt deep in my bones. Her lips quivered, but she didn't deny it. Footsteps pounded back toward us, and Greg reappeared, breathless. Nobody's out there, but the safe is empty. What? Mom's face drained of color. He rounded on me, seething. What did you take? Nothing. I shot back truthfully. I didn't even know there was a safe. His expression twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck. You think this is a game? You're going to tell me. Suddenly, the sound of distant police sirens pierced the stormy night, growing louder by the second. Greg stiffened. His face contorted with barely contained fury as he backed toward the shattered window. This isn't over. Without another word, he vanished into the storm. I didn't wait for the cops to arrive. With shaking hands, I grabbed the documents I'd hidden in the car and sped away, adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't process what just happened, but I knew one thing. Greg was involved in something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, and my mother had helped cover it up. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. An unknown number again. This time I answered. I have more answers, the man's familiar voice rasped. Meet me at the old factory on Route 5 alone. Before I could respond, the line went dead. The old factory loomed like a forgotten giant against the stormy skyline. Rusting beams twisted into the dark clouds, and shattered windows stared down like hollow eyes. My headlights cut through the thick fog as I rolled up the deserted road. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as I parked near the crumbling entrance. My pulse thundered in my chest, fear and adrenaline locked in a brutal tug of war. The documents burned a hole in my backpack, the only leverage I had. I clutched my phone, ready to call Olivia if things went south. She was the only person I could trust now. A faint creak echoed from inside the factory. I tightened my grip on the pepper spray in my pocket and stepped through the rusted metal doors. The interior was worse than I expected. Machinery lay abandoned under layers of grime, and the smell of oil and rust lingered in the air. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, making every sound sharper, more threatening. Suddenly, I spotted a dim light flickering at the far end of the hall. Swallowing my fear, I crept toward it. As I rounded the corner, I froze. The man from before stood under a single hanging bulb, soaked and shivering, his face gaunt and shadowed. But he wasn't alone. My mother was there, her wrists bound, slumped against a metal beam. Mom! My voice cracked despite myself. She stirred weakly but didn't lift her head. The man raised a hand slowly, motioning for me to stop. She's alive for now. What the hell is going on? I demanded, stepping closer. Put the bag down, he ordered, his voice cold. I hesitated. Who are you? Call me Ryder, he said. I'm the one trying to keep you alive. Before I could respond, another voice rang out. A voice I knew too well. Drop the act, Ryder. Greg emerged from the shadows, a gun clenched in his hand. His eyes gleamed with malice. My stomach twisted into knots. Ryder didn't flinch. You're out of time, Greg. The authorities are already closing in. Greg sneered. Let them come. By then, we'll be long gone with the money. Everything clicked into place. The forged death certificate, the trust fund freeze, and now this. They weren't just after my money. They were running from something far bigger. You killed my father, didn't you? My voice trembled, but I held his gaze. Greg's smirk widened. Killed? No. He was useful. Until he wasn't. Ryder shifted, muscles tense. The insurance payout bought you time, but embezzling from your own company was a mistake. Greg scoffed. Spare me the lecture. Before I could react, he lunged toward me. But Ryder was faster. He tackled Greg, sending the gun skidding across the floor. Run! Ryder shouted. But I couldn't leave, not without my mother. Heart pounding, I rushed to her side, frantically tugging at the ropes binding her wrists. Mom, wake up! Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Ashley, you shouldn't have come. A thunderous crack echoed behind me. Greg and Ryder still locked in a brutal struggle. The gun lay just feet away. I grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor and charged. The impact jarred through my arms as I struck Greg's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Ryder seized the moment, wrestling him into a chokehold. Call the cops, Ryder barked. With shaking hands, I dialed 911, gasping out our location before my voice broke. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Greg thrashed one last time, but Ryder held firm until police officers stormed the factory, weapons drawn. Within moments, Greg was cuffed and dragged away, cursing and spitting like a cornered animal. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, shouting officers, and swirling questions. Ryder disappeared into the chaos, vanishing as suddenly as he'd appeared. The police assured me they'd find him, but I doubted it. My mother was rushed to the hospital, barely coherent but alive. In the end, she confessed everything: the insurance fraud, the financial schemes, and how Greg had manipulated her into helping fake my father's death. But even her confession couldn't undo the damage. Weeks later, I sat on the worn steps of my tiny new apartment, clutching a cup of cold coffee. The trust fund was restored, most of it anyway. Greg was facing decades behind bars, but the fallout left scars far deeper than financial ruin. My mother never apologized, not really. Maybe she didn't know how. Olivia urged me to move forward, to let the past die. But part of me couldn't. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many ghosts lingering in the shadows. And Ryder, wherever he was, he knew the full story. As I stared out at the empty street, a familiar envelope rested on the step beside me, sealed in red wax. The same strange insignia. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a single slip of paper. The truth is still out there. Be ready. What would you have done in Ashley's place? Drop your thoughts below and check out our other gripping stories.